Hey everybody, this is a follow-up to my Coravina two-part episode that I did on the Armoured Skeptic channel, part of the Tell Me More series. I have to be kind of honest with this one. The Coravina video was very difficult to make. Not in the actual creation of it specifically, but just like on my psyche, it weighed very heavy on me. Doing a tragedy is very difficult. Patrice and I had a lot of fun though putting it together. We thought it would be really neat because there were just so few videos about the Coravina Incident. And when we announced that we were going to be doing an episode on Russian hikers that went missing in the mountains, everybody thought we meant the Dyatlov Pass, which of course was a tease because we knew that that's what everybody would think. So when Patrice brought this to me, I thought, it was perfect. Because, not only could we bring information about something that very few people know about and there's very few videos about, but we could do it in, it's like a really good test for the Tell Me More series, the Tell Me More format. And it was one of the few two-parters that we've done. So I got to really dive deep into the whole story. But it took us from the point that we started writing it to the point that we uploaded it, it was about 3 weeks for both videos together. And that was 3 weeks of me thinking about terrible, awful things that have happened to people. And then the terrible, awful things that happened to them afterwards. And then all the implications of what it meant and trying to, dissect what happened to them. And that made me a little bit depressed after a couple of weeks. So you might have noticed that I kind of missed doing a follow-up to this particular video right away, and I did the Art Bell Halloween special instead, which I guess didn't really need a follow-up, but that was still fun to follow up anyways. But I think I'm finally in the right headspace to do this one again. So just a little catch-up. The Coravina Incident was a group of hikers from Kazakhstan. They were in Siberia, and just south of Lake Baikal, which is one of the most ancient lakes in the world. It actually follows a fault line, and somebody actually left a comment, I forgot to screen cap it. It's getting slightly bigger and bigger as the two tectonic plates separate, which is kind of interesting. It's also one of the deepest lakes, if not the deepest lake in the world. So there was a lot of speculation about what happened to these hikers because they died very mysteriously. The symptoms that they suffered, I'm not going to repeat them here just out of fear of getting demonetized again. That was a really big problem with part 2, which I'll get to in a minute because I've got a couple comments here that sort of address that. There was some weird editing at the end of part 2. I think that what happened to them was probably something to do with the golden root that they were eating, as well as a combination of the weather coming in, essentially giving them hypothermia. And chances are that that's what, ended their trip, ended their lives in the end, was the hypothermia more than anything. But the question is, how did they get to that point where they were essentially ignoring the signs of hypothermia? And why did they end up climbing several hundred feet on a day that they should have been descending the mountain? It's called the Coravina Incident because the leader of the group was named Coravina. But Valentina was the only survivor, and Valentina said that they descended the mountain after the night that it snowed. But that's not what the maps show. The maps show that they climbed several hundred feet and then essentially succumbed to the elements. But what was really bizarre about their passing was that they all suffered from a wide variety of crazy symptoms. And then they all kind of just passed out. And then Valentina Udachenko left, and she seemed obviously kind of catatonic. She was just trying to avoid the elements herself. And then she climbed back up the mountain to where they were. They were in a slightly different condition than they were when she left them, which indicates that they didn't all pass away immediately when they suffered from their symptoms. They probably survived a little bit longer and then eventually succumbed to the elements. So like I was saying, the question is not how did they die, because I think that how they died was literally hypothermia, but how did they get to that point where they were doing dumb things to ignore their condition and continue on with the hike? Why didn't Coravina, the group expert, order them to descend the mountain immediately? Valentina said they did, but that's up for debate too. So it's like, how did those symptoms happen too? That's the other question, is what was it that caused those symptoms? Because some of the things that were found, like the fact that, you know, many of them had stripped a lot of their clothing off and taken their shoes off and stuff, that's very typical with hypothermia. And I think most people would agree that that is what happened in the end. But the other symptoms that they were suffering from were not typical hypothermic symptoms. Hopefully I've given you enough context. I really don't want to go through the story again. Like I said, it's kind of depressing. I don't think in the future I'm going to be doing a ton of these like tragic event stories anymore. I'll probably do the odd cold case or true crime or unsolved mystery kind of thing. But you know, they're going to be few and far between. I definitely don't have it in me to be like one of those channels that constantly talks about depressing, tragic, scary things, serial killers, stuff like that. That really gets me down. I really don't like thinking about that stuff because it always makes me worry about that kind of stuff happening to the people that I love the most. And I even at one point talked about the remains, and the remains were suspiciously well preserved. At least some of them were. And I posed a question about why, and I got really good comments about that. So one of the issues that I brought up in the video was that it took the Russian government over a month to put together a rescue mission or a recovery mission. And I found that very offensive that it would take them that long. Obviously, though, it was just outside of the USSR. The USSR had just collapsed. The Russian government had just essentially started taking over the land, as it were. All those countries, including the country that all the hikers came from, Kazakhstan, that had only just recently seceded from the USSR and become its own sovereign nation. So there's a lot of political turmoil in that time. And that's what Eugene here has to say. As someone from post-USSR country, it's not surprising at all that it took them a month to mount a rescue mission. It's more surprising that they did it at all. Remember, it's 1993, remote location in Siberia. USSR fell just a few years ago. Russia is barely functioning, even in Moscow. Most of the country, especially Siberia, is dirt poor and has barely functioning local government. Thanks for reminding me of that, Eugene. I did kind of want to address that in the video, but I think that it's better to let somebody who actually lived it and experienced it, or at least lives in a place where they would understand exactly what it was that the conditions were like in this region at the time. I felt like it might have been a little insulting for me to just be like, Russia's poor and they can't handle their shit. Even then though, a month. Especially considering we're talking about tourists, people from another country who have come to Siberia to, you know, spend money, help the economy out, and, you know, it sends a poor message that you're not going to take care of tourists, that if people from other countries come over to, you know, help your economy out and enjoy your landscape and do some tourism, that you're not going to help them if they get in trouble, or at least respect their remains. So one of the theories was that they had succumbed to some sort of radiation poisoning. Maybe there was a nearby nuclear test, or, you know, maybe there was fallout in the mountainous region that they were hiking through, and that's possible. The mountains are a very popular place for the military to test munitions, and you know, they have to tell people, or at least they're supposed to tell people when they're doing it so they don't hurt anybody. But if it's a top secret test, they're not going to tell people, hey, we were testing nukes here. Very few countries divulge that kind of information, especially when they're doing mainland nuclear tests. And so they're definitely not going to want to divulge that they've poisoned or irreparably damaged a landscape with nuclear fallout. One of the things I mentioned in the video that I edited out because I was worried that it was the reason my video was getting demonetized was that in like a weird kind of show of synchronicity, the exact same date, many years later, last year, there was some sort of a missile test in Russia that went astray. It exploded. There was a big explosion that I showed in the final cut, the full version that my patrons got to watch. My patrons always get to see an extended version of all my videos anyways. Anything that I feel isn't good enough to make it into the final, you know, anything that ends up on the cutting room floor, and even just like dumb stuff that I think is just my own personal opinion, which I feel isn't like good enough to make it into the video. Stuff that I feel it doesn't make it really like a tight edit. My patrons get to see that. But then if there's stuff that also YouTube demonetizes that I need to remove so that I can monetize my video, my patrons also get that. So I talked about this missile test and explosion. There was a bunch of like nuclear material test sites that were in the region that they all shut down around the same time. But the Russian government denied that there was a nuclear test or a nuclear accident. And I think that the weapon itself wasn't literally nuclear, but I think that its propulsion system was. One of the possibilities, like I said, was that they died of radiation poisoning, but that's kind of a hard sell. I didn't really believe that, and a lot of you guys didn't believe it either. Also, infrasound was one of the possibilities, an infrasound weapon. But, you know, again, that's kind of a hard sell too. I didn't really believe it, but I was just going through all the different things that could cause those sorts of symptoms, that could cause the feeling of like burning up or you can't breathe. FunCube Side says, so, well, radiation and infrasound is bull. If it was radiation strong enough to give you immune symptoms, Valentina would have died too. Maybe. I agree that it was bizarre that Valentina was the only one that didn't suffer the symptoms. That's the really difficult thing about this puzzle, is if it was something environmental, then they all should have suffered, and they all suffered their symptoms at essentially the same time. That was the really like hitting point, is that all these people started suffering almost immediately at the same time, just at a random point, but Valentina didn't. So like, why? If it was infrasound, it also would have affected her, because both of it has a bigger region it affects and doesn't stop right away, but only gets weaker slowly. Right, so it would have to be fairly close up, I think is what he's saying. Sound waves diminish over a distance, and infrasound is supposed to be a very narrow beam sound, so it would end up dissipating too much over distance. So it would have to be somebody like basically coming right up to them and attacking them with it. And yeah, that's sort of hard. That's a hard sell. I think the forbidden flower is closer to it because they collected that plant. I assume they may have collected other plants too, which they may have mistaken for another plant, but was actually toxic. Foaming at the mouth, heart attacks, bleeding, choking, you know, those are all some of the symptoms at least. And going crazy are all symptoms that I would expect of poisoning. Right, so like you're getting close to the key. You're getting close to the answer here. It definitely does sound like they were poisoned, and I think that that's what it was. But if you stick around a little longer, I'm going to tell you exactly how I think that was. This is addressing the hypothermia thing. Absolutup says, the taking off the shoes and taking off clothes is evidence of hypothermia death. When someone is dying of hypothermia, the sensation of cold turns into a sensation of burning heat. Many times when people die of hypothermia, they're found naked because they were dying. They felt like they were on fire. Right, and I think I mentioned that in part 2, but that's absolutely right. A lot of the symptoms cause people to completely lose like their logic center of their brain. Like people that are lost in the woods with hypothermia, for example, they'll walk right across a road and it won't even dawn on them that if they follow that road, it would lead somewhere. they just continue on through the deep woods. Almost all hypothermia victims are found either partially naked or with their shoes off. And that's something that comes up a lot in the Missing 411 series, that quite often the victims are missing their shoes. And again, that is very likely because they're suffering from hypothermia at some point. The story sounds like hypothermia deaths, and the people couldn't take the pain, so they were likely bashing their heads against rocks and stuff. That's just what it sounds like to me. Right, and a couple of the victims were hitting their heads on rocks and stuff. That is possible that it's because of hypothermia. However, the problem I have with that is that the symptoms came on too quickly. Like, it was all at once. All of a sudden, one of the hikers fell, another hiker fell, and then a handful of the remaining ones just started grasping at their throats like they couldn't breathe and hitting their heads. And that it happened all way too quickly for it to have been hypothermia at that exact moment. I mean, it's possible that they were in early stages of hypothermia, but they weren't quite at the burning skin stage yet. I think eventually they succumbed to hypothermia, but not until after all of this, because they did move quite a bit after Valentina left and came back. Okay, this one's kind of giving a little hint, going in the right direction here. Great Sky Troll Anti-Drama says, golden root? Bet Valentina didn't have any. Well, that's a very good guess. Chances are she did. There is no official account. I might have even said the term official account a few times, but like, again, we're talking about recently after the USSR. The Russian government only looked into this so much. And Valentina's story is like really broken up, not very fleshed out, kind of hard to explain, understand. And part of that might be because she doesn't even remember it that well, because she was either under a lot of stress or she was suffering from some of these symptoms herself, which were affecting her memory. But from the sounds of it, Valentina was indeed chewing on the golden root as well. 3 Ring Archive says, even the over-the-counter versions of supplements are known to have trace amounts. Trace amounts of what? Trace amounts of what, Greg? Okay, golden root, you can buy it over the counter in a lot of places. But what a lot of people don't know is that you have to prepare it in a very specific way. If you over-aggressively break it down, if you grind it too much, I think even if you blend it, there's lots of ways to sort of extract the golden root that are actually very stupid to do. I actually am a little bit worried at how readily available golden root is, and how in the United States, I was watching this little docu piece from the news about somebody or a group of people in Alaska that grow golden root. Alaska has an extremely similar, essentially identical climate to Siberia, as well as like northern Canada. I would be very careful about where you buy golden root from. I would be sure to buy like proper name brand stuff that you know has been refined properly, because if you over aggressively grind it up, the golden root has a self-defense mechanism to stop animals essentially from eating it. And because it grows so sparsely, because the conditions are not great for it to grow, it needs to have this self-defense mechanism to make sure it doesn't get all eaten up. So it actually produces its own hydrogen cyanide if it's over aggressively ground up. So my theory is, because they were hypothermic or they were starting to get cold because they spent the night sleeping in the snow, many of them woke up wet and cold, and they were probably low on energy because they weren't sleeping very well. They probably gathered up all the golden root that they had gathered so far, and they probably made a tea out of it, thinking that, you know, we will give them tons of energy, it'll help suppress the pain from the cold, which it probably did, and maybe that was the reason they continued to climb, because they were ignoring their body's symptoms because the golden root was suppressing them. But if they, you know, also could have released the hydrogen cyanide in it, and its chances are they all consumed hydrogen cyanide that morning in their tea. And then all of those symptoms that they suffered from, the foaming at the mouth, bleeding from the ears, inability to breathe, just pain boiling underneath the skin, those are also symptoms of hydrogen cyanide poisoning. So that's what my money is on. And the likelihood that Korovina, the leader, she died of a heart attack. That's another thing. Heart attack is one of the symptoms. But the survivor, Valentina, it's possible she either didn't have the tea or she had somehow built up a tolerance to cyanide. And I mean, that brings up the whole question about what if they were spies, or what if she was a spy. I think that might have been a possibility that I played around with in the video, because there was a nearby military base. So it's possible that, that they were doing a checking up on what the Russian government, the Russian military was doing. It's also possible that Valentina had just had lots of golden root in her life. She had chewed it a million times at her farm, and sort of built up this immunity to it. The thing is, though, so what I said in the video, I think that this was what probably got me demonetized, is that I said in the video that very small amounts of it, very, very, very small amounts, will make you pass out. Like, you don't need a ton of it to kill you, but even a small itty bitty amount of cyanide will make you suffer many of those symptoms, and then you'll pass out. You'll go into a coma, essentially. If you go into a coma in below 0 degree weather, below freezing weather, you will die of hypothermia in your sleep. And some of those people, it looked like they woke up and then took off their clothes and then essentially died. I think that the 1-2 punch with this group of people was that they poisoned themselves, and as they were lying in the snow, suffering these symptoms, hypothermia took them. So yeah, it's very sad, it's very tragic. They didn't go gently. It was a very awful way to go. Painful, suffering, and I'm sure that, the stress of being on top of the mountain too, I'd feel so trapped, because they were above the tree line when this happened. So they were very high up, thousands of feet up above sea level. There's also just the possibility that, golden root itself, even if the hydrogen cyanide isn't released, it still causes a good deal of side effects. So the point, people take golden root because it suppresses pain, it gives energy. It's supposed to be this miracle supplement that makes you like a superhuman, that doesn't need coffee and doesn't need painkillers or whatever. It gives you more endurance. It's great for hiking, hypothetically, because it gives you the ability to hike more and eat less. That's the other thing, is it's an appetite suppressant. So these hikers were probably not eating very much, and they were probably hiking way too much every day. They were probably burning their bodies out every day, and the golden root was helping them do that and then suppressing the symptoms that you would feel from doing that. One of the symptoms is, I'm just going to let Tailweaver here describe them. So the common effects of golden root include allergy, irritability, insomnia, increased blood pressure, chest pain, agitation, anxiety, and headaches. Though these are uncommon and mild, it's only in the cases that are normal amounts of ingested, right? So these hikers definitely had way too much, especially if they all had golden root throughout the entire hike. And apparently they had been chewing on it the entire hike. So there's a reason why the natives of that area say that there's an elemental spirit that protects the mountain and punishes people for stealing that root, because they wouldn't have understood possibly that the root itself is poisonous. They would just remember, at least culturally, that you can get hurt from eating that root, so don't pick it, don't chew it, don't eat it, and prolong the use of it. The way that they used it is absolutely an abuse of the substance. Even if you swear by golden root, I would suggest you never use it the way that these hikers did, because they were burning their bodies out And then they're probably over-consuming, which was, causing probably a litany of other problems. They were also hiking in advanced weather conditions, which would only compound these issues. Insomnia, hypothermia, and headaches probably compounded heavily within the group, making any form of complex thought near impossible. Even the one that survived was so zoned out that she didn't originally respond to the group that found her. Maybe she was catatonic. Maybe she was, in shock. Or maybe also her brain was fried from the conditions that she had just survived. Maybe she just didn't have her wits about her because she hadn't eaten properly in like a week and had consumed way too much golden root. So in the morning when they headed out, they went up instead of down in a delirium. Sasha died from increased blood pressure, most likely causing the heart to either fail or rupture. Sasha was the one bleeding from the eyes and ears. Didn't die of heart failure, but yeah, you're probably right though. So after that, chaos ensued as fight or flight reactions happened. The survivor was just lucky enough to actually run and headed down the mountain. I think she didn't really talk after because her brain was so fried during the whole thing that she doesn't really remember too much of it. Possibly. There was nothing really to remember because the brain had moved its prime function to survival, which often turns off less important functions of the brain. The comment goes on a little longer than that, but you get the gist of it. That even if they didn't suffer from this hydrogen cyanide, the golden root itself could still have been the reason that they suffered these symptoms, or at least pushed themselves to the point where their bodies just started to fail. The last thing I'm going to talk about here is the decomposition of the bodies. Some of the bodies looked way too well preserved, and for some reason no scavenging animals had picked away at them, which I found very bizarre. I would not recommend looking up the video. It is blurred out, but there is a video here on YouTube that shows the remains, and you'll see that I think it's Sasha, the oldest male in the group. His body's in immaculate condition. Lep Kember says, "I'm no expert, but as far as I know, most of Siberia is covered in tundra and the borean forests, where the soil is low in nutrition. Therefore, bacteria, insects, and critters are low in number in those areas." Yeah, and on top of that, they were above the tree line. So there's, literally above where most things even grow. So yeah, way less bugs, definitely way less birds. However, there were I don't know if there were coyotes, but there were definitely bears. And there would have been a handful of animals in the region that would have smelled the remains. That could be the reason why the corpses were still in relatively good shape, as there were not enough decomposers to accelerate the process of decomposition. Right, but we do have bacteria in our body as well that just naturally make us decompose, that they start to consume the body after we die. And it didn't really look like those had properly taken effect in some of the hikers. The other possibility of that, somebody pointed out that winter conditions or cold conditions will also preserve a body. And that's true. I did say that it snowed the night before they died, and that was what contributed to their death. But it didn't stay cold. It was the middle of August. So the sun should have been hot enough during certain periods of the day to incubate any bacteria. So I just wonder, why did no scavenging animals come to collect the bodies? And I think that it's possible that the animals could tell that they had been poisoned by something. Then that's very common. That's very common in poisoning deaths of different kinds, where animals simply will not touch a body that they know has been poisoned. Most scavenging animals and carnivores and omnivores that scavenge, like bears and wolves and coyotes and stuff, they can smell the cause of death, essentially. So I think that the reason that the bodies were so immaculate was because nothing wanted to touch them. And yeah, on top of that, they were above the tree line, where it is naturally colder. and where there's no bugs or anything like that. A lot of what I was saying in those videos was trying to hint towards this great finale. Well, great finale, but I was trying to build up to this crescendo at the end of the video, revealing that I think that the golden root was the cause. And because in part 1, all I said about the golden root was that the natives of the area say that there's an elemental spirit on the mountain that protects the golden root and protects the mountain from people trying to steal the golden root. I'm sorry that I had to give it a weird edit. I'm sorry that YouTube, the edit was way worse than I wanted it to be. I do apologize for part 2 being so choppy, but I was like right down to the wire. This is kind of the catch-22, the double-edged sword, as it were, of having a schedule. Is that it's great for me having this schedule because it is really helping me stay motivated to pump out more and more content. And Patrice and I just absolutely love maintaining this level of work ethic. However, when it comes to like actually uploading the video, sometimes when things get right down to the wire, and YouTube, like I uploaded 4 or 5 times, and YouTube just kept demonetizing it, and I couldn't figure out why. So if you haven't seen my Philadelphia experiment video, please go see my Philadelphia experiment video. YouTube didn't recommend it. I don't know why. Well, I think I know why. I used a little term that I'm never going to use again, and I'm going to have to ban from my comment sections, because they also ban and demonetize and remove from the algorithms videos that have certain words in the comment sections, which is really not fair. The whole point of the series was to lead up to this hydrogen cyanide golden root revelation that I had made. So that is the big takeaway, is I'm not going to tell you not to take golden root, because a lot of people swear by it, and I'm sure that if I tried it, I'd be happy with it. But just be very careful about where you're sourcing it from. Don't just buy it from any old Chuck or Nancy that has a patch of golden root in their backyard, because I've seen the way that some of these people, the supplement people, prepare it, and they grind it up in blenders. And, I'm sure that for the most part it's safe, but if you're not careful, if you're over aggressive with golden root, it will release hydrogen cyanide naturally. It just does that naturally. So be very careful about how you consume it. Make sure you're sourcing it from reliable sources. And that's why I said in the video, even over-the-counter versions of it contain trace amounts, because there's no way to be absolutely sure that there's none. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the Coravina series. Make sure to subscribe to the Armored Skeptic channel to see the Tell Me More series. Our next video we're going to be doing on the Mandela effect, and I think you'll enjoy that. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching. You guys know the drill. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please consider supporting Armoured Media through Patreon and by buying our merch. The links are in the description.